Stop this wedding! The scream ripped through the grand ballroom of Belmont Country Club like a gunshot. 300 guests in silk and diamonds spun around. Standing in the center aisle was a 14-year-old black girl, skinny, shaking, clutching a battered leather satchel to her chest. A woman in pearls yelled, "Security! There's a little thief loose in the ballroom!" Security lunged forward, but no one reached her in time. Because the groom, the handsome, silver-templed man in a $5,000 tuxedo, had already seen her face. His charm vanished. His smile collapsed. His skin went the color of ash. He recognized this child, and in 3 seconds he bolted, sprinting for the exit like a man who just saw his own grave open. What did a 14-year-old black girl from Richmond, Virginia know that made a grown man abandon his own wedding? And what was hidden inside that old leather satchel? Now hold on. That moment right there? It changes everything. Let's get into it. 18 months before that scream echoed through Belmont Country Club, Whitney Scott was sitting on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment in Richmond, Virginia, braiding her own hair because the only person who ever did it for her was gone. Whitney was 14. Skinny arms, large dark eyes that noticed everything, and a quietness that most people mistook for shyness. It was not shyness. It was an observation. She sat in the front row of every class at Jefferson Middle School, read books meant for college students, and taught herself spreadsheets from YouTube tutorials. She kept the household budget in a color-coded Excel file that would have impressed an accountant. Her teachers called her the little professor. Her classmates called her nothing, because most of them pretended she didn't exist. She lived with her grandmother, Ruth Scott, a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher whose arthritis had curled her fingers like old roots and whose faith was the only thing holding the roof over their heads. Ruth kept a Bible on her nightstand and a photograph of her daughter on the wall, the daughter she had just buried, Denise Scott, Whitney's mother. Denise had spent 16 years as an ICU nurse at Richmond General Hospital. 12-hour shifts, holiday rotations, double overtimes, weekends she never saw. She was the kind of woman who stayed 2 extra hours with a dying patient so they wouldn't be alone, then came home and braided her daughter's hair with hands that still smelled like hospital soap. Kind, trusting, and after 16 years of raising Whitney alone, deeply lonely. She met a man online. He called himself Grant Edwards. Grant was white, well-spoken, and carried himself like a man who had never worried about money. He talked about yacht clubs and business ventures and a future where Denise would never work another night shift. He brought flowers. He remembered Whitney's birthday. He looked Denise in the eyes and told her she deserved to be loved. And she believed him, because after 16 years of giving love to everyone else, someone was finally giving it back. But Grant Edwards was not giving. He was taking. He told Denise about a medical technology startup, cutting-edge devices, government contracts, guaranteed returns. He showed documents with official letterheads. He introduced a business partner over video call, probably a man in a rented room reading a script. He even took her to an office in downtown Richmond with his name on the door. A 6-month lease paid with another woman's money. Denise invested everything, the $184,000 she had saved over 16 years. Overtime pay, skipped vacations, birthday money set aside, and finally, a second mortgage on the only home Whitney had ever known. Within 10 months, Grant Edwards vanished. Phone disconnected, office empty. The business partner, the startup, the name itself, none of it existed. Denise tried the police. The officer listened for 3 minutes and asked if she had maybe just sent money to a boyfriend. She tried the bank. Transfers were authorized. Nothing to reverse. She sat in the parking lot of Richmond General, the place where she had saved lives for 16 years and realized no one was going to save hers. She wrote a letter to Whitney. She explained everything. She apologized, not for loving someone, but for trusting the wrong one. She described one detail she noticed too late. The man had a small, crescent-shaped scar behind his left ear.
And she wrote words that Whitney would carry like a second heartbeat for the rest of her life. Baby girl, don't you ever let anyone tell you your mama was stupid. She was just a woman who believed in love. And believing in love should never be a crime. 3 days after writing that letter, Denise Scott was found in her car by the James River. She was gone. Whitney found the letter in her mother's bedside drawer that same night. She read it 11 times before sunrise. Then she opened her laptop, created a new spreadsheet, and titled it, Finding Him. She was 13 years old, no money, no connections, no one who believed a black girl from Richmond could find a ghost. But she had her mother's letter, her mother's love, and a fury so quiet it could melt steel. The man who destroyed her mother was already out there. New name, new smile, hunting his next victim. He had no idea the hunt had just reversed. Whitney's first stop was the Richmond Police Department. She walked in on a Tuesday afternoon carrying a folder of printouts, screenshots, bank records, a timeline she had built herself. The officer at the front desk, a thick man named Nolan, looked at her the way people look at a stray dog that wandered into a restaurant. He didn't ask her to sit down. He didn't offer water. He glanced at her braids, her worn shoes, her second-hand jacket, and said, "Can I help you?" Whitney explained, calmly, clearly. Her mother had been defrauded by a man using a false identity. She had documentation. She needed to file a report. Officer Nolan flipped through 3 pages of her folder without reading a single one. Then he closed it. "Sweetheart, you need to have an adult come in and file this. We can't take a report from a minor." Whitney told him her grandmother could barely walk. Nolan shrugged. "Policy is policy." She came back 3 weeks later with Ruth, who had taken 2 buses and climbed 14 steps on swollen knees to reach the detective's office. Detective Brenda Collins was kinder. She actually read the documents. She nodded in the right places. And then she said, "Honey, without a real name, a current address, or bank cooperation, there's really nothing we can do. I'm sorry." She wrote "inactive" across the top of the file and placed it on a stack of identical folders. Whitney counted them. There were over 40. 40 women, 40 ghosts, 40 dead ends collecting dust on a metal shelf. Nobody cared. The humiliation followed her to school. Word spread the way it always does in small communities, fast and cruel. 2 girls, Tiffany and Jordan, made sure Whitney heard them in the cafeteria. "Her mama gave their rent money to some man off the internet," Tiffany said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear. Jordan laughed. "That's what happens when you're that desperate." The table erupted. Whitney sat alone, gripping her pencil until her knuckles turned white, staring at her tray, saying nothing. A teacher walked past. She heard the laughter. She saw Whitney sitting alone. She kept walking. That night, Whitney added a new tab to her spreadsheet. Victims. Other women. She began her own investigation. Public records, reverse image searches, social media archives. She was methodical, precise, tireless. She discovered that Grant Edwards had used his dating profile photo on a real estate website in Charlotte, North Carolina, under a different name. Greg Emerson. Different name, same face. And in one photo, barely visible behind his left ear, the crescent-shaped scar. Whitney found an online forum for romance fraud survivors. She posted details about Grant Edwards anonymously. Within 2 weeks, 4 women from 4 different states had sent her private messages. Each one had been conned by a man matching the same description.
Gerard Ellis in Atlanta, $165,000. Graham Easton in Tampa, $250,000. Gavin Elmore in Raleigh, $130,000. Every name is different. Every name starting with the same 2 initials, G.E. Every story is identical. Lonely woman, charming man, medical startup, vanished. Whitney organized everything into a 22-page document, photos, timelines, financial records, cross-references, and brought it back to Detective Collins. Collins was genuinely impressed. She spent 20 minutes reading it. Then she looked up and said, "Whitney, this is federal territory. You'd need the FBI." Whitney asked for the number. She called from her grandmother's kitchen phone. She was put on hold for 45 minutes. Transferred 3 times. Finally, a weary voice told her to submit a tip through IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center. Whitney submitted the tip that same night. She received an automated confirmation email. Then nothing. Days of nothing. Weeks of nothing. Silence so thick, it felt like the entire federal government had looked at a 14-year-old black girl's cry for help and simply pressed delete. Then came the worst blow. Whitney discovered that the man, her mother's killer, was now in Greenwich, Connecticut, using the name Garrett Ellison. He was engaged to Caroline Davenport, daughter of Harold Davenport, the billionaire real estate developer. Whitney found the engagement announcement in a society magazine, a glossy, full-page photo of a smiling couple at a charity gala. The man was tanned, silver-templed, wearing a suit that cost more than Denise Scott earned in a month. Behind his left ear, barely visible in the photo, the scar. Whitney wrote a letter to Caroline, detailed, evidence-backed, desperate. She mailed it certified, return receipt requested, spending $11.40 she had saved from mowing lawns. 2 weeks later, a response arrived. Not from Caroline, from Harold Davenport, on embossed letterhead that probably cost more than the stamp Whitney used. "Young lady, I don't know who put you up to this pathetic stunt, but if you contact my daughter again, I will have our attorneys ensure you regret it. Garrett Ellison is a respected businessman and a cherished member of this family. Your baseless accusations are disturbing, and frankly, given your background, not surprising. Do not write to this address again." Given your background. Whitney read those 3 words over and over. She knew exactly what Harold Davenport meant. Not her background as a child, not her background as an orphan, her background as a black girl, a poor black girl, a poor black girl who dared to accuse a rich white man in a world where rich white men are always believed and poor black girls are always ignored. The police dismissed her. The FBI forgot her. A billionaire threatened her. And the man who stole her mother's life was about to do it again. In a country club where the cheapest bottle of wine cost more than Ruth Scott's monthly Social Security check. Every door, every single door had slammed in her face. This part right here? Yeah, this pissed me off. You got a 14-year-old girl out here doing more than the police, the FBI, and a whole billionaire. Like, how does that even make sense? And they still looked at her like she was nothing. That's crazy to me. So now think about it. You're 14. You're by yourself. Every single door just keeps shutting on you. Be real. Most people, they're done right there. They're done right there. That night, Whitney pinned Harold Davenport's letter to her bedroom wall, right next to the wedding announcement. She stared at them both. The billionaire's threat on the left, the con man's smile on the right.
She opened her laptop. She opened a new spreadsheet tab and titled it The Wedding Plan. The wedding was in 3 months, and if the police wouldn't stop it, if the FBI wouldn't stop it, if a billionaire could threaten a child and face no consequences, then a 14-year-old girl from Richmond, Virginia, with a leather satchel and her dead mother's letter, would stop it herself. Whitney needed 3 things to stop that wedding: proof that Garrett Ellison was a fraud, testimony from his other victims, and a way inside Belmont Country Club. She started with the proof. Garrett Ellison's name appeared on a Delaware LLC, a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware, the state where anyone could hide behind a corporate filing and a mailbox. But Whitney had learned something from months of digging through public records. Every P.O. box has a paper trail. She cross-referenced the box number with a database of UPS store locations and found that the box had been opened with a driver's license. She submitted a Freedom of Information request, written in formal legal language she'd copied from a legal aid website, revised 4 times until it sounded like a lawyer wrote it. 6 weeks later, a redacted document arrived. The license number was blacked out, but the physical description was not. 6'1", 185 pounds, brown hair, hazel eyes. It matched Grant Edwards. It matched Greg Emerson. It matched every ghost this man had ever been. Whitney printed the document and slid it into her mother's leather satchel. Next, the victims. She contacted the 4 women from the online forum: Patricia Townsend in Charlotte, Sandra Coleman in Atlanta, Beverly Adams in Tampa, Diane Foster in Raleigh. She sent each of them the same message. My name is Whitney. I'm 14 years old. This man killed my mother. I need your help to stop him before he does it again. 3 of them responded within 24 hours. The 4th, Beverly Adams, called Whitney directly, sobbing before she even said hello. Whitney conducted video interviews using her grandmother's old tablet, propped against a stack of textbooks on her bedroom desk. Each woman told the same story: the charm, the startup, the promises, the money disappearing. Each woman had lost between $80,000 and $250,000. 2 of them had tried to end their own lives. All 4 of them had gone to police. All 4 had been ignored. Whitney recorded every interview. She organized the testimonies chronologically, tagged each one with dates, dollar amounts, and the alias used. She stored everything on a USB drive and placed it inside the satchel, next to the FOIA document, next to her mother's letter. The satchel was getting heavier. Worn brown leather, initials DS embossed on the flap, Denise Scott, with a small tear on the strap that Whitney had repaired with dental floss. It was the last birthday gift her mother ever bought herself. Now it carried enough evidence to destroy the man who destroyed her. Then Whitney did something that changed everything. She rewrote her IC3 submission. Not the scattered tip she had filed months ago. This time, she compiled a 40-page document, organized like a federal case file. Subject header: Serial Romance Fraud. Subject: Lyle Craddock. Below it, 6 aliases listed chronologically: Grant Edwards, Greg Emerson, Gerard Ellis, Graham Easton, Gavin Elmore, Garrett Ellison. Each alias linked to a victim, a city, a dollar amount, and a timeline. Cross-referenced photos, financial transfer patterns, the crescent scar documented in 4 separate images across 3 states. She submitted it on a Sunday night from her grandmother's kitchen table. 3 days later, her phone rang. The caller ID said, Washington, D.C. FBI Special Agent Teresa Walsh, White Collar Crime Division. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of a woman who had spent 15 years investigating fraud and thought she had seen everything. Whitney, I've reviewed your submission. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did someone help you build this file? A lawyer? An investigator? No, ma'am. Just me. Silence on the line. Then Walsh said, quietly, I've been doing this for 15 years. I have never seen a civilian case file this thorough. The fact that a teenager built it, I don't even know what to say. The FBI opened a formal investigation that same week. But Walsh was honest. Building a prosecutable case would take months. Subpoenas, warrants, bank records, bureaucracy. The wedding was in 19 days. Whitney said, He's going to marry that woman, take her money, and vanish. We don't have months. Walsh paused. Then she said the words that lit the fuse. If you can get him to reveal his true identity in front of witnesses, that gives us probable cause for an immediate arrest. We'd have agents on standby. 19 days. Whitney had 19 days to get inside the most exclusive wedding in Greenwich, Connecticut, and make a con man unmask himself in front of 300 people. She was 14. She was black. She was broke. And she was the only person on earth who could stop him. How? Whitney spent 3 days researching Belmont Country Club like she was planning a military operation. She learned that the club hired temporary staff for large events through an agency called Sterling Event Services. Sterling posted listings on a local staffing website. Whitney couldn't apply. She was 14, but buried in Sterling's FAQ page, she found one sentence that changed everything. Sterling partners with local schools to offer community service volunteer positions at qualifying charity events. The Davenport wedding included a charity auction, a tax write-off Caroline's family had attached to the reception. That made it a qualifying event. Whitney spent 2 hours studying Greenwich Academy's community service program, their requirements, their forms, their language. Then she called Sterling Event Services, introduced herself as a sophomore at Greenwich Academy, and volunteered for the wedding. The woman on the phone didn't ask for ID. She didn't ask for a photo. She asked Whitney's shirt size. Small. Whitney was assigned to coat check. Getting there was the next problem. A one-way Greyhound ticket from Richmond to Greenwich cost $38. Whitney had 22. She spent the next week mowing 3 neighbors' lawns and selling her old textbooks to a secondhand bookstore on Broad Street. The owner gave her $9 for 4 books and said, "You sure you don't want to keep these, honey? A smart girl like you?" Whitney shook her head. She needed the bus more than she needed the books. She told Ruth she was going on a school field trip to Washington, D.C. It was the first lie she had ever told her grandmother, and it sat in her stomach like a stone. But she knew with absolute certainty that if she told Ruth the truth, Ruth would stop her. Ruth would say it was too dangerous. Ruth would say, let the FBI handle it. And the FBI needed months they didn't have. The night before she left, Whitney packed her mother's satchel. The USB drive, the printed evidence, the FOIA document, the victims' testimonies, and at the very bottom, folded carefully inside a plastic sandwich bag to protect it from rain, Denise's letter. She zipped the satchel shut and held it against her chest. "I'm coming, Mama," she whispered. "I'm almost there." 642 miles away, in a private dining room at the Greenwich Yacht Club, the man who called himself Garrett Ellison was raising a glass of Chateau Margaux at his rehearsal dinner. He was magnificent. That was the sickening truth. He stood at the head of a mahogany table,
24 guests hanging on his every word, telling a story about his years in London finance, a career that never existed in a city he had visited exactly once. His voice was warm, his timing was perfect. His cufflinks, gold, monogrammed GE, caught the candlelight as he gestured. Caroline Davenport sat beside him, her hand on his arm, her eyes shining with the absolute trust of a woman who believed she had found the love of her life. Her father, Harold, clapped Garrett on the shoulder and said, "Best thing that ever happened to this family." The table applauded. Later, Garrett excused himself to take a phone call in the hallway. His voice dropped. The warmth vanished. "Everything's handled. After the honeymoon, we moved the funds to the offshore account. 6 months, tops." He ended the call, adjusted his tie, walked back into the dining room with a smile so perfect it could have been painted on. Nobody at that table knew they were applauding a predator. But a girl on a Greyhound bus did. Whitney arrived in Greenwich at 5:47 a.m. on June 15th. She had slept upright for 9 hours with the satchel on her lap. She walked from the bus station to Belmont Country Club, 2.3 miles along roads lined with hedgerows taller than her apartment building back home. Every house she passed was bigger than her entire block in Richmond. The driveways had gates. The lawns had sprinkler systems that probably cost more than her grandmother's annual income. She arrived at the service entrance at 7 a.m. Black pants, white shirt, the volunteer uniform she had been emailed. She was the only black person on the catering staff, 14 people in total. A supervisor named Helen handed her a clipboard and pointed toward the foyer. "Coat check. Smile at the guests. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for God's sake, keep that bag out of sight." Whitney nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She hid the satchel behind the coat rack. Then she stood at her station and waited. The guests began arriving at 3 p.m. Black Mercedes, white Bentleys, silver Rolls Royces. Women in gowns that cost more than Denise Scott earned in a year stepped through the foyer and handed Whitney their coats without looking at her. One woman dropped a fur stole on the counter and walked away mid-sentence. She was on the phone, laughing, and didn't register Whitney's existence at all. Another woman looked Whitney up and down, slowly, top to bottom, and said to her companion, "They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel with the help these days, aren't they?" Whitney smiled. "May I take your coat, ma'am?" The woman didn't answer. She was already gone, invisible. A black girl in a service uniform at a white country club wedding. No one saw her. No one questioned her. No one imagined for even 1 second that this skinny child hanging coats in the foyer was carrying enough evidence in a leather satchel to bring down the groom and send him to federal prison. Invisibility, Whitney realized, was not a weakness. It was a weapon. At 4 p.m., the ceremony began. Whitney watched through a crack in the ballroom doors. She saw the string quartet. She saw the white roses. She saw Caroline Davenport gliding down the aisle in a dress that looked like it was made of starlight. And she saw him, Garrett Ellison, Lyle Craddock, Grant Edwards, whatever name he wore today, standing at the altar with that smile, that perfect, practiced predator's smile. The officiant opened his book. Whitney reached behind the coat rack. She pulled out the satchel. She unzipped it. She took the USB drive in her left hand. In her right hand, she held her mother's letter, folded, soft, stained with tears that were 18 months old. She whispered, "I'm here, Mama. I made it." She pushed open the ballroom doors. Security moved immediately. Brock, the thick-necked head of the detail, stepped into her path. "Miss, staff aren't allowed in the—" Whitney walked straight past him. He grabbed her arm. She turned, looked him dead in the eye, and said, loud enough for the nearest 30 guests to hear,
Take your hand off me. I have information about a federal crime. Brock froze. Helen rushed over. She's just a volunteer. I'll handle this. But Whitney was already in the aisle. 300 faces turned toward her. 300 pairs of eyes, confused, offended, some already reaching for their phones. And Whitney Scott, 14 years old, opened her mouth and spoke the words that stopped the world. But what she said, and what happened in the next 3 seconds, that's something you need to hear for yourself. Stop this wedding! The words hit the ballroom like a thunderclap. The string quartet stopped mid-note. 300 guests froze, forks half raised, champagne glasses suspended, whispers dying on painted lips. The only sound was the echo of a 14-year-old girl's voice bouncing off crystal chandeliers. Whitney stood in the center aisle, skinny, shaking, wearing a catering uniform that was half a size too big. Her braids were coming loose from the humidity. Her sneakers squeaked on the marble floor. She was holding a leather satchel in one hand and a folded letter in the other, and she was looking directly at the man standing at the altar. Harold Davenport shot to his feet. His face was purple. "Security! Get this child out of here! Now!" Brock and 2 other guards moved toward her from 3 directions. A woman in the second row clutched her necklace and said, "I knew it! I told you! They'll let anyone in these days!" A groomsman near the altar laughed and shook his head. "Is this a joke? Somebody grab her!" Nobody grabbed her, because Whitney was already speaking. She looked past the guards, past the billionaire, past every silk-draped, pearl-wearing person in that room, and spoke directly to Caroline Davenport. "Ma'am, my name is Whitney Scott. I'm 14 years old. I came here from Richmond, Virginia, 642 miles on a Greyhound bus. 18 months ago, the man standing next to you used the name Grant Edwards to steal $184,000 from my mother, Denise Scott. She was a nurse. She worked 16 years to save that money. He took every dollar. And when she had nothing left, when she couldn't feed me, couldn't pay rent, couldn't look my grandmother in the eye, she drove to the James River, and she never came home." Whitney's voice cracked. One fracture, one heartbeat of silence. Then it came back, harder than before. "My mother is dead because of that man." The ballroom went so quiet you could hear the candle flames bending in the air conditioning. Caroline's bouquet trembled in her hands. She turned to the groom. "Garrett, what is she talking about?" Garrett Ellison laughed. It was smooth, immediate, the laugh of a man who had practiced dismissal like a concert pianist practices scales. "Caroline, sweetheart, I have never seen this child in my life. This is obviously some kind of scam. Harold, can we please—" Whitney cut him off. Her voice carried like it was wired to a speaker system, but it wasn't. It was wired to 18 months of rage. "You've never seen me? Then why are you sweating through a $5,000 suit right now? And why did your left hand just move to cover the scar behind your ear? The crescent-shaped scar my mother described in the letter she wrote the night before she died." The room turned to the groom. His left hand was, in fact, raised to the side of his head, frozen there, like a man caught reaching for a weapon he didn't know was visible. Caroline stepped back. "Garrett, what scar?" Whitney opened the satchel. She pulled out a photograph and held it high. "This is you, in Charlotte, 2019. Name, Greg Emerson. You stole $210,000 from Patricia Townsend." Another photograph. "Atlanta, 2020. Gerard Ellis. $165,000 from Sandra Coleman." Another.
Tampa, 2021. Graham Easton. $250,000 from Beverly Adams. Another. Raleigh, 2022. Gavin Elmore. $130,000 from Diane Foster. Each photo landed like a bomb going off in slow motion. Each name hung in the air like smoke. The guests sat paralyzed, mouths open, phones rising, the collective realization spreading through the room like a cold wave. Whitney held up the final photo. Not a con man's alias, not a fake name from a fake life. A woman, smiling, wearing nurse's scrubs. Tired eyes, warm face, braids done fresh on a Sunday morning. Richmond, 2024. Grant Edwards. $184,000. And one life. My mother, Denise Scott. Whitney looked at the groom. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Your real name is Lyle Craddock, born in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Prior conviction for check fraud, 2012. Every alias you've ever used starts with G.E. because you're too arrogant to change the monogram on your cufflinks. 300 heads turned to the groom's wrists. Gold cufflinks. 2 letters engraved in elegant script. G.E. Caroline looked at the cufflinks, then at the photographs, then at the girl. She stepped away from the altar. Lyle Craddock's mask didn't slip. It shattered. His charm evaporated. His posture collapsed. His eyes, those practiced, sparkling predator's eyes, went feral with panic. He ran. He turned and sprinted for the side exit, crashing through a candelabra, shoving his own best man to the floor, tearing across the ballroom like an animal escaping a cage. 3 seconds. That was all it took for 10 years of lies to collapse under the weight of one girl's truth. But he wasn't going to make it far, because Whitney Scott hadn't come alone. Lyle Craddock burst through the side exit and into the sprawling grounds of Belmont Country Club. Manicured hedgerows, stone pathways, a rose garden that cost more to maintain than most families spend on groceries in a year. He sprinted across the lawn with the desperate, graceless stride of a man who had always planned his exits, but never imagined one would come like this. He had a bag in his rental car. He always kept a bag. Cash, a passport under a name no one in that ballroom had ever heard. A burner phone with one number saved. He had done this before. Not the running, not exactly, but the vanishing. He was good at vanishing. He had built an entire life around the ability to become no one in under an hour. The parking lot was 200 yards away. He could see the rental car, silver sedan, backed into the space nearest the exit, just the way he always parked. Always ready. Always one step ahead. He reached into his pocket for the keys. And then he saw them. 2 unmarked black SUVs parked side by side at the country club gates. Doors already open. 4 figures in dark tactical vests fanning out across the parking lot with the calm, practiced movement of people who had done this 100 times. FBI Special Agent Teresa Walsh stepped forward, badge raised, voice flat, official, and final. Lyle Craddock, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and interstate fraud. Do not move. Lyle stopped. His shoes skidded on the gravel. He looked left. Agents. Right? Agents. Behind him, the ballroom doors exploded open and guests poured out onto the terrace, phones raised, recording everything. 300 witnesses, 300 cameras. Nowhere to run, nowhere to vanish. No new name that could save him now. For 10 years, Lyle Craddock had relied on one simple truth. People are too ashamed to fight back.
The women he destroyed were too embarrassed to go public. The police were too overworked to care. The system was too slow to catch him. He had counted on silence and shame, the way other men count on paychecks. He never counted on Whitney Scott. And then Lyle did something that no one, not Walsh, not the agents, not the 300 guests with their phones, expected. He turned around. He walked back toward the ballroom, not running this time, walking, slowly. His face twisted into something between rage and disbelief.
He walked straight toward Whitney, who was standing at the edge of the terrace, still holding her mother's satchel. He grabbed her by both shoulders. His fingers dug into her arms. His face was inches from hers. This 42-year-old man, towering over a 14-year-old girl, his eyes wild, his teeth clenched, his voice shaking with fury. "You stupid little girl. You have no idea what you've done. Do you understand? You've ruined everything." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Caroline screamed. Harold Davenport shouted something. Phones recorded every frame. Whitney did not scream. She did not pull away. She did not cry. She looked up at this man who had sat across from her mother at dinner tables, who had kissed her mother goodnight, who had whispered promises into her mother's ear while his hand was in her mother's wallet. And she held his gaze with the stillness of someone who had already survived the worst thing that could ever happen to her. "I did what my mama couldn't," Whitney said. "I stopped you." Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Every person on that terrace heard it. Every phone captured it. And in that moment, the entire balance of power in the universe shifted. From a man who had spent a decade taking everything from vulnerable women to a child who had nothing left to lose and nothing left to fear. Agent Walsh was there in 3 seconds. 2 agents seized Lyle's arms and wrenched him away from Whitney. He was forced to the ground, face pressed against the same gravel that lined the driveways of the mansions he had always pretended to own. Handcuffs clicked shut. "You have the right to remain silent," Walsh said. And for the first time in his life, Lyle Craddock had nothing to say. The chaos did not stop. It rippled outward. Guests shouting, security scrambling, Caroline collapsing into a chair on the terrace, Harold Davenport standing motionless with his mouth open. The string quartet still holding their instruments like they were waiting for someone to tell them what to play at the end of the world. But for Whitney, the noise faded. Everything faded. She walked away from the terrace, down the stone pathway, into the rose garden, alone. The late afternoon sun was turning everything gold. The hedgerows, the white petals, the surface of the ornamental pond at the garden's center. Her catering uniform was wrinkled. Her braids had come undone on one side. Her sneakers were scuffed from 642 miles of travel and the hardest walk of her life, the 30 feet from the foyer to the altar. She sat down on a stone bench. She set the satchel on her lap. It was lighter now. The photos were scattered in the ballroom. The USB drive was in Agent Walsh's evidence bag. The FOIA documents were spread across the aisle like fallen leaves. Only one thing remained inside. Whitney reached in and pulled out the letter. Her mother's letter. Folded soft from 1,000 openings, the edges were worn to cotton. A coffee stain marked the upper right corner from the morning Whitney had read it at the kitchen table and knocked over Ruth's mug. The handwriting was Denise's. Neat, careful, nurse's handwriting, the kind trained to be legible on charts, where legibility could mean the difference between life and death. Whitney unfolded it. She didn't need to read it. She had memorized every word 18 months ago. But she needed to see it. She needed to see her mother's hand in the curves of the letters, the pressure of the pen, the place where the ink had smeared because Denise had been crying when she wrote it. She read the last line. "Baby girl, don't you ever let anyone tell you your mama was stupid. She was just a woman who believed in love." Whitney pressed the letter to her chest. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 18 months, since the night she found that letter in a bedside drawer in a one-bedroom apartment in Richmond, Virginia, Whitney Scott cried. Not from pain. She had used up all her pain a long time ago. Not from anger. The anger had done its job. It had carried her here, fueled every spreadsheet, powered every phone call, pushed her through every slammed door and every whispered insult, and every adult who looked at her skin and her age and decided she was nothing. This was relief. The bone-deep, soul-shaking, body-trembling relief of a promise kept. She had told her mother she would find him. She found him. She had told herself she would stop him. She stopped him. "I found him, Mama," she whispered. "He can't hurt anyone else." Footsteps on the stone path.
Whitney opened her eyes. Caroline Davenport was walking toward her. The wedding dress trailed on the ground behind her, catching on rose thorns and gravel. Her mascara had drawn dark rivers down both cheeks. Her veil was gone. She looked like a woman who had woken up from a dream and discovered it was a nightmare. She stopped in front of Whitney. Then she did something that no one in that country club, with all their money, all their breeding, all their centuries of social protocol, would have expected. She knelt. A billionaire's daughter in a $40,000 wedding gown, kneeling on a dirt path in front of a 14-year-old black girl in a $12 catering uniform. "You saved me," Caroline said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Whitney looked at her. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for my mom." Caroline nodded. Tears fell onto the white satin of her dress. "Then your mom saved me." They sat together on the bench. Neither spoke for a long time.
Two people from opposite ends of everything. Wealth and poverty, white and black, bride and orphan, connected by the same predator, saved by the same love. Then footsteps again, heavier this time. Harold Davenport, the billionaire, the man who had written a letter threatening a 14-year-old girl for daring to tell the truth. He stood at the entrance to the rose garden, and for the first time in perhaps his entire adult life, he had no authority in his posture, no power in his voice. He looked at Whitney, at the satchel, at the letter, at this child who had accomplished what his wealth and lawyers and influence could not. And he said, quietly, "I owe you an apology that I don't know how to make." Whitney looked at him. She did not blink. "You can start by believing the next black girl who writes you a letter." Harold Davenport said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The girl had already said everything. On the other side of the estate, Lyle Craddock sat in the back of an FBI vehicle, handcuffed, silent, watching through tinted glass as 300 wedding guests stood on the terrace recording his destruction on their phones. Agent Walsh walked into the rose garden. She knelt in front of Whitney, eye level, the way you speak to someone you respect, not someone you pity. "You did something extraordinary today, Whitney. You know that?" Whitney nodded. Then she said, "Will you make sure the other women know? Patricia, Sandra, Beverly, Diane. Will you tell them it's over?" Walsh smiled. "I'll make sure they know it was you." Whitney shook her head. "No. Tell them it was my mother. Tell them it was Denise Scott." The FBI formally charged Lyle Craddock that evening. 14 counts of wire fraud, 6 counts of identity theft, 2 counts of interstate fraud. Total confirmed stolen, over $1.2 million from 6 women across 4 states. Whitney gave her official statement in the back of Agent Walsh's SUV, wrapped in a blanket from the country club's linen closet. When the recorder clicked off, Walsh said, "The lead prosecutor called me 20 minutes ago. His exact words,
This is the most organized fraud case file I've ever received, and a 14-year-old built it. Whitney didn't smile. My mama kept good records at the hospital. She taught me, if you write it down, it's real. If you don't, it never happened. Caroline Davenport found Whitney before she left, changed out of the wedding dress, jeans, sweater, face scrubbed raw. She offered a private jet home. Whitney declined. She offered money. Whitney shook her head. My mama taught me you don't take money you didn't earn. Caroline didn't argue. She arranged a hotel room and 2 first-class Greyhound tickets, because Whitney had said, quietly but firmly, I came on Greyhound. I'll leave Greyhound. The wedding guests, the same people who had stared at Whitney like she was a stain on the marble floor, now approached her one by one as she waited in the foyer. Some shook her hand. Some couldn't speak. A retired judge named Eleanor Whitfield took both of Whitney's hands in hers and said, Young lady, I've spent 30 years on the bench. I have never seen justice served as purely as it was today. That night, in a hotel room nicer than any place she had ever slept, Whitney called her grandmother. Ruth answered on the first ring. She had been by the phone for hours, worried about the school trip. Whitney told her everything. The investigation, the bus, the wedding, the arrest. Ruth was silent for a long time. Then her voice came through, breaking and full. Your mama is so proud of you right now, baby. I can feel it in my bones. Whitney fell asleep holding the letter. For the first time in 18 months, she did not dream about the river. Lyle Craddock never went to trial. He pleaded guilty. Not out of remorse, but because a trial would have meant every woman, every alias, every stolen dollar paraded across national television. His attorney negotiated behind closed doors. It didn't help. The judge, a woman named Margaret Hale who had read Whitney's case file cover to cover, sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of early release. His assets were seized. $440,000 in offshore accounts. A condo in Miami purchased with Beverly Adams' retirement savings. A storage unit in Delaware containing fake IDs, prepaid phones, and 6 tailored suits, one for each identity. Every dollar recovered was distributed among the victims' families. Patricia Townsend, Sandra Coleman, Beverly Adams, Diane Foster, and Ruth Scott on behalf of Denise. It wasn't enough. No amount of money could return what was truly stolen. The trust, the dignity, the years, the lives bent and broken by a man who treated human hearts like ATM machines. But it was something. It was validation. These women were not fools. They were not desperate. They were targets, chosen, groomed, and destroyed by a professional predator. And now the world knew it. Whitney's story broke first on a Richmond local news station. A reporter named Dawn Jeffries had been covering romance fraud for years and recognized the case immediately. Her segment, The Girl Who Stopped a Wedding, aired on a Tuesday evening. By Thursday, it had been picked up by 3 national networks. By the following Monday, Whitney Scott's face was on every screen in America. In every interview, she said the same thing. I just followed the trail. My mama left me the map. She never took credit, not once.
A civil rights foundation awarded Whitney a full scholarship, tuition, room, board, and books to any university of her choice. A prominent law firm in Washington offered to sponsor her education from high school through law school. Whitney accepted. She told a reporter she wanted to study criminal justice, specifically fraud and financial crimes targeting vulnerable communities. There are a lot of women like my mom out there, she said. They deserve someone who believes them the first time.
Caroline Davenport used her family's resources to establish the Denise Scott Foundation, a nonprofit providing legal aid and financial counseling to victims of romance fraud, with a specific focus on women of color who were disproportionately ignored by law enforcement. Whitney was named to the advisory board. She was the youngest member by 20 years. Harold Davenport wrote a letter, not typed on embossed letterhead this time, handwritten.
Delivered by personal courier to Ruth Scott's apartment in Richmond. In it, he admitted that his dismissal of Whitney's original letter was rooted in assumptions he was ashamed to name aloud. He pledged $2 million to the Denise Scott Foundation. And he wrote one line that Ruth read to her church congregation the following Sunday. You taught an old man that justice doesn't come from power. It comes from courage. And courage doesn't care about age or color. Ruth framed the newspaper article about Whitney and hung it on the wall next to Denise's photograph. The one in the nurse's scrubs, the tired eyes, the warm smile. She told her congregation, "My granddaughter is 14 years old, and she already changed the world. Imagine what she'll do at 24. Whitney went back to Jefferson Middle School. She sat in the front row. She opened a new spreadsheet, this one for her college application timeline. Tiffany and Jordan, the girls who had laughed in the cafeteria, said nothing. One of them slipped a note onto Whitney's desk. I'm sorry. Whitney read it, nodded once, and put it in her satchel. The satchel was empty of evidence now. But it wasn't empty. It carried something heavier than photographs and court documents. It carried proof that love, even when it's broken, even when it's exploited, even when it's used as a weapon against the person who gave it, can still build something indestructible. Whitney Scott's story is not just about catching a con man. It is about what happens when the world decides, before you open your mouth, before you show what you can do, before you even get a chance, that you are worth nothing. Because of your age, because of your skin, because of the second-hand dress you're wearing and the bus ticket you bought with lawn mowing money. It is about a system that failed at every level. Police who shrugged. Federal agents who filed a tip and forgot it. A billionaire who looked at a child's cry for help and saw a threat to be crushed. And a man, a predator, who spent a decade exploiting the one thing that should never be used as a weapon, a woman's desire to be loved. But more than anything, it is about a girl who refused to accept that the world was right about her. Every door slammed shut. She knocked on the next one. Every adult dismissed her. She built her own case. Every system told her to wait. She decided she was done waiting. Whitney Scott did not have money. She did not have power. She did not have connections. She had a spreadsheet, a leather satchel, a dead mother's letter, and the kind of courage that most people only dream about. And she won. Not because the system worked, because she worked. Because she was smarter, more determined, and more relentless than every person who underestimated her. And there were hundreds of them. Real talk. This is exactly why I told this story. You've got a 14-year-old girl outsmarting every adult in the room, and nobody says a word. Nobody gives her credit, not until she forces them to. And let's be honest, we all know why. Because she's black. That's what makes it worse. Denise raised a whole genius, and the world looked at her daughter like she was nobody. Yeah, that's not okay. Never was. If this story moved you, if you believe that courage has no age, that justice has no color, that every voice deserves to be heard, then share this video with someone who needs it today. Tell me in the comments,
What would you have done in Whitney's shoes? And if you haven't already, subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with us. Because we tell stories the world tries to silence, and we will never stop. Whitney Scott, 14 years old, leather satchel over her shoulder, braids catching the afternoon sun, walking home from school like any other girl. But she's not any other girl. She never was. Hashtag Justice for Denise, hashtag Whitney Scott, hashtag Stop the Wedding.